Ethan Hayes. Vanessa Pike Hayes. Claire Hayes. My wife's name still feels like a prayer when I say it. I am Walter Hayes. I am 71 years old. And for 30 years, I was the man banks called when they suspected someone was being robbed by the people closest to them. I never thought that person would be me. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand what this trip meant before I tell you what happened to it. Claire died 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. For months from diagnosis to the funeral, I sat in that hospital room every single day, holding her hand, watching the woman I married at 24 disappear a little more each morning. On the last night, she squeezed my fingers and said something I have never told anyone until now. Don't let Ethan drift away from you, Walter. Promise me. I promised. Ethan is my son. 38 years old. Good heart. Weak spine. That's how Claire used to describe him, laughing, but there was truth under the joke. He's not a bad man. He's a man who has never once, in his entire life, said no to someone who pushed hard enough. 6 years ago, he married Vanessa Pike. I want to be fair here. I want to tell this story the way I was trained to look at a suspicious account. No assumptions, just facts, in order. So I'll say this plainly. Vanessa was polite to me. She remembered my birthday. She sent photos of my grandchildren, Lily and Sam, on the holidays. From a distance, she looked like a good daughter-in-law. But Claire never trusted her. Not once. And Claire was rarely wrong about people. She counts things, Walter. Claire told me once, after a Thanksgiving dinner where Vanessa had asked, almost casually, what our house was worth. She counts things other people don't count. I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. After Claire passed, the house got quiet in a way I can't fully explain to someone who hasn't lived alone after 46 years of marriage. I'd wake up and reach for her side of the bed before I remembered. I'd cook dinner for 2 out of habit and throw half of it away. Grief doesn't announce itself. It just sits in the chair across from you every night, saying nothing. Ethan called maybe twice a month. Sure calls. How are you doing, Dad? Fine, fine. Nothing underneath. I missed my son. I missed my grandchildren. And in March, I had an idea that felt, for the first time in a long while, like something to look forward to. An Alaska cruise. 8 days. Glaciers, whales, the kind of trip Claire and I always talked about and never took because there was always a reason to wait. A roof to fix, a grandchild's tuition, someday. I decided someday was going to be this summer, and I decided I wasn't going to take it alone. I called Ethan. I told him I wanted to book it for the whole family. Him, Vanessa, Lily, Sam, and me. My treat. Every cabin, every excursion, paid in full. Dad, wow. That's really generous. He sounded surprised. Maybe even moved. Let me talk to Vanessa. I should have paid closer attention to that sentence. Let me talk to Vanessa. Not we'd love to. Not the kids will be thrilled. Let me talk to Vanessa, like he needed permission to be happy about his own father's gift. But grief makes you generous with people. It makes you want to believe the best. So I didn't think twice. 2 days later, Ethan called back and said yes. I booked it that same afternoon. 6 berths on the northern horizon, departing July 14th out of Seattle. I paid the deposit from my own account. The one Claire and I built together over 4 decades of careful saving, careful spending, careful everything. Compliance work does that to a man. You learn to watch the numbers the way other people watch the weather. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to happiness. I bought a new camera. I imagined myself on the deck with Sam, teaching him how to spot a humpback spray on the horizon, the way my own father once taught me to spot deer tracks in the snow. I imagined Lily laughing at something silly I said. I imagined, most of all, sitting next to Ethan somewhere quiet, just the two of us, finally saying the things we never say on 2-minute phone calls. I had 91 days until departure. I counted them like a man counting down to Christmas. Then, 6 weeks before the trip, I got a text message. Not a call. A text. It was from Vanessa. I remember exactly where I was standing when I read it. In the kitchen, by the window, the one that looks out over the maple tree Claire planted the year Ethan was born. I remember the phone felt heavier in my hand after I read the first line. Hi Walter, hope you're doing okay. So, we've been talking, and we think it might be better if this cruise is just our little family this time. Ethan and I really need this time together with the kids. I hope you understand. We'll plan something with you soon, promise. I read it 3 times. Just our little family. I am Ethan's father. I raised that man. I taught him to ride a bike in the parking lot of the First Baptist Church on Route 9. I sat up with him the night before every exam he ever took. I am, by every definition that has ever mattered, his family. But apparently not this time. I paid for the trip. Every dollar of it. And I was being uninvited by text message from my son's wife, while my son said nothing at all. I called Ethan immediately. It went to voicemail. I called again 20 minutes later. Voicemail again. I texted him. Can we talk about this? 3 hours passed before he answered, and when he did, it was one line. Sorry, Dad. It's just easier this way right now. We'll make it up to you. Easier. Easier for who? I sat at my kitchen table that night with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, staring at that maple tree in the dark, and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a young man starting out at the bank. A very specific, very quiet kind of alertness. The kind you feel when a number on a page doesn't match a number in a file, and every instinct you've spent your career sharpening tells you, look closer. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being a compliance officer for 30 years. You stop being able to switch it off. You start noticing when a story doesn't add up, even in your own family. Especially in your own family. And 2 things about that text message didn't add up. First, Vanessa said we. Not I think. Not Ethan and I decided. We think. As if there had been a meeting. As if there had been a plan discussed at a table I was never invited to sit at. Second, and this is the part that kept me awake until 2 in the morning, 3 days before that text arrived, I'd gotten a notification from my bank's mobile app. A minor one, easy to miss. Someone had attempted to log into my account portal from an unrecognized device. I had dismissed it at the time. Probably nothing, I told myself. Probably a glitch. I did not yet know how wrong I was. I did not yet know that the cruise was never really about a cruise at all. I finished my coffee, cold as it was, and I made a decision that night that would change everything that came after. I decided I wasn't going to call Ethan again. I wasn't going to beg to be let back onto a boat I had already paid for. I was going to find out exactly what easier this way really meant. I just didn't know yet how far that answer would take me, or how close I had come to losing everything Claire and I had spent our whole lives building. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 18 months. I opened my laptop and logged into my own bank account like I used to review a client file, slow, careful, looking for anything that didn't belong. Nothing jumped out. Balance is normal. No unauthorized transactions. Just that one login attempt from an unrecognized device, sitting there in the security log like a splinter I couldn't stop touching with my tongue. I told myself it was probably nothing. I told myself that 3 or 4 times before I stopped believing it. 2 days after Vanessa's text, Lily called me. She's 14, sharp as a tack, the only one of my grandchildren who still calls just to talk, not because her parents told her to. Grandpa, why aren't you coming on the cruise anymore? My chest tightened. Your mom and dad thought it might be better for it to just be family this time, sweetheart. There was a pause on the line. A long one. That's weird, Lily said. Mom told Aunt Rachel it was because Grandma Loretta and Uncle Ray were coming instead. She said there wasn't enough room. I sat very still. Loretta and Ray. Vanessa's mother and stepfather. Not enough room. On a cruise with 6 paid berths, room for a 14-year-old's grandfather had apparently been replaced by room for her mother's parents. Don't tell your mom I told you that, Lily said quickly, sounding suddenly nervous, like she'd said more than she meant to. Please, Grandpa. I won't, sweetheart. I promise. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. The cruise wasn't shrinking to protect some private family moment. It was being restructured. Someone had made a decision, and I hadn't just been excluded, I had been replaced. By the very woman Claire warned me about, and the man she'd married. I want to tell you my first feeling wasn't anger. It should have been. Most men would have picked up the phone and shouted. But 30 years of watching fraud unfold teaches you something strange. Anger is what tips your hand. Anger is what lets the other side know you've noticed. And the one advantage I had, the only one, was that nobody in that family had any idea what I used to do for a living, or how good I still was at it. So instead of calling Ethan and demanding answers, I did something quieter. I called my old assistant from the bank, a woman named Carol who'd retired the year before me and still had more friends in that building than I did. Walter Hayes, she said, delighted, when she picked up. To what do I owe this? I asked her, carefully, generally, not mentioning names, What it might mean if someone attempted to log into a family member's online banking portal from an unfamiliar device shortly before a major family event. Carol went quiet for a second. Then her voice changed. The professional voice, the one I recognized because it used to be mine. Walter, is this about you? I didn't answer right away. Walter, if someone's testing access to your accounts, that's not random. People don't accidentally guess a login. Either they had partial information, an old password, a hint, something, or they're probing. Has anything else seemed off? Mail missing? Anyone asking about your finances? And that's when it hit me. A small detail I'd brushed past 3 weeks earlier without thinking twice. A letter. I remembered it clearly now. An envelope from a law office I didn't recognize, addressed to me, that I found already opened on the kitchen counter the day after Ethan and Vanessa had come by to drop off Sam's birthday gift a week early. I'd assumed I'd opened it myself and forgotten. I do that sometimes now, more than I used to. I'd barely skimmed it before setting it aside. Something about estate planning services and protecting your family's future. Junk mail, I'd figured. Everyone over 70 gets that kind of thing. I hung up with Carol, walked to the small filing drawer in my study where I kept things I hadn't dealt with yet, and found the letter again. This time, I read every word. It wasn't junk mail. It was a letter from a law firm, Whitfield and Cross, confirming an initial consultation that had been scheduled regarding power of attorney documentation and asset protection planning for one Walter J. Hayes. I had never called that number. I had never scheduled any consultation. I had never heard of Whitfield and Cross in my life. Someone had called on my behalf. I sat down slowly in my study chair, the same chair I used to grade Ethan's math homework in when he was a boy, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not panic, not yet, but a cold, clear kind of focus. The kind I used to feel walking into a branch office where the numbers didn't match the story. Someone was building a file. On me. Without me. I called the law office the next morning, using a slightly different voice than usual, a little slower, a little more confused. The voice, I'm ashamed to say, that I guess they might already be expecting from me. Hi. Yes. I received a letter about a consultation, and I wanted to confirm a few details. Could you tell me who originally scheduled it? The receptionist, cheerful and unsuspecting, pulled it up. Sure thing, one moment. Looks like the appointment was scheduled by a Vanessa Hayes on behalf of her father-in-law. She indicated you'd been experiencing some memory difficulties and wanted to get ahead of things for your protection. Memory difficulties. I have never in my life forgotten a filing deadline, a wire transfer amount, or an anniversary. I balanced Claire's checkbook to the penny for 40 years. And now, apparently, there was a paper trail started by my own daughter-in-law, without my knowledge or consent, describing me as a man whose mind could not be trusted. I thanked the receptionist, hung up the phone, and sat in the silence of my house for a long, long time. This was no longer about a cruise. This was no longer even about being excluded from a family trip I had paid for out of love and grief and hope. Somewhere behind polite text messages and birthday photos and casual phone calls, someone had already started writing a story about me. A story where Walter Hayes was becoming forgetful, becoming unreliable, becoming a man who needed other people to protect his assets for his own good. And I understood, with the same cold clarity I used to feel reviewing a case file at 2 a.m, that stories like that don't get written by accident. They get written on purpose, by people who already know exactly how the ending is supposed to go. I looked at Claire's photo on the mantle that night before I went to bed, and I said the same thing I used to say to her every single time a case at the bank looked hopeless, and everyone told me to let it go. Not this one. I didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't know about the loan documents. I didn't know about the forged signature waiting for me in a file I hadn't seen yet. I only knew one thing for certain. Lying in the dark that night, staring at the ceiling. Somebody in my family had already decided I was finished. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I didn't sleep much that night. By 5 a.m, I was already at my desk with a legal pad, doing something I hadn't done in years, building a case file. Except this time, the subject was my own life. I wrote down everything I knew, in order, the way I used to train junior analysts to do it. Facts only. No conclusions yet. 1. Vanessa's text, 6 weeks before departure, replacing me on a trip I paid for. 2. Lily's slip about Loretta and Ray taking my place. 3. an unrecognized login attempt on my bank portal. For a law firm consultation scheduled in my name, by Vanessa, describing memory difficulties I did not have. For facts that, taken alone, could each be explained away. Taken together, they formed the outline of something I recognized immediately because I had spent 30 years of my career hunting exactly this shape. It's called isolate, discredit, control. I'd seen it dozens of times at the bank, usually with elderly clients, usually orchestrated by a relative who smiled a great deal in the lobby. Step 1. Isolate the target from people who might notice something is wrong. Step 2. Quietly build a paper trail suggesting the target's judgment can't be trusted. Step 3. Use that paper trail to gain legal or financial control. I had spent my whole career on the other side of that file, protecting strangers from exactly what appeared to be happening to me. I decided I needed two things before I did anything else: my own eyes on my own accounts, and someone I trusted at the bank who didn't already know my family. I still had a relationship with Meridian Trust, the bank where Claire and I had done business for over 20 years. I called and asked for the branch manager, a man named Daniel Mercer, whom I'd met a handful of times at community events. I didn't tell him everything on the phone. I just asked for a full transaction review, in person, and a look at any recent account inquiries. Daniel greeted me warmly when I came in the following Tuesday, but his expression changed the moment I explained, calmly, what I suspected. "Let me pull everything up," he said, and his voice had gone careful in a way I recognized from my own years behind a similar desk. It took him almost 20 minutes of clicking through screens before he turned the monitor toward me, his jaw tight. "Mr. Hayes, there was an inquiry made about 3 weeks ago. Someone called our customer service line claiming to be a family member helping you manage your accounts, asking about your mortgage balance and whether a home equity line of credit was currently open." "Who made that call?" "The notes say the caller identified herself as your daughter-in-law. She wasn't given any account information. Our verification process caught it, since she wasn't listed as an authorized party. But the call was logged." I sat there for a moment, absorbing that. Vanessa had tried to get information about my mortgage, about whether I had equity available to borrow against. "Daniel, I need you to do something for me. I need a full security flag placed on my accounts. No changes, no new authorized users, no address changes, nothing, without me physically walking in here and showing identification. Can you do that?" "I can do that today," he said. "I'll also loop in our fraud and security team, just so there's a formal record." That's how I met Mara Jennings. Mara was the bank's security officer, a woman in her 50s with the kind of steady, unimpressed calm I used to respect enormously in the people I worked alongside. She joined us in Daniel's office within the hour, and I told her everything. The cruise, the text message, the law firm letter, the mortgage inquiry. She listened without interrupting once, taking notes the entire time. When I finished, she looked up at me. "Mr. Hayes, I want to be straightforward with you. What you're describing has a pattern to it. Someone is laying groundwork, possibly for a power of attorney application, possibly for something more aggressive, like petitioning for guardianship on the basis of diminished capacity. Have any documents like that come to you directly? Anything asking for a signature?" "No, nothing yet. That may come. I'd encourage you to be very careful about anything you're asked to sign in the next few weeks, even something that looks routine. And I'd strongly suggest speaking with an attorney of your own, someone who represents only your interests." I thanked her, and as I stood to leave, she added one more thing that stayed with me the whole drive home. "For what it's worth, Mr. Hayes, most people in your situation don't catch this. Most people trust their family completely, right up until the paperwork is already signed. You caught it early. That matters." I didn't feel like I'd caught anything yet. I felt like I'd only opened the first drawer of a filing cabinet and found it was fuller than I expected. 2 nights later, the second piece arrived, not from the bank, but from my own mailbox. It was a manila envelope, hand-delivered, no postage, left in my mailbox sometime during the day while I was out. Inside was a document titled Durable Power of Attorney, 6 pages long, prepared by Whitfield and Cross, naming Ethan Hayes as my attorney-in-fact with what the document called broad and unrestricted authority over my financial affairs. There was a sticky note on the front in Ethan's handwriting. "Dad, Vanessa thought this might give everyone peace of mind, just in case something ever happens. No rush, just sign when you get a chance and we'll come by and grab it. Love you." just in case something ever happens. I read the document twice. It wasn't a simple, limited authorization for emergencies, the kind reasonable families sometimes set up. This was sweeping. It gave the holder authority to sell property, open and close accounts, take out loans, and make gifts of my assets, all without any requirement to consult me, and without any court oversight once signed. I noticed something else, too, something that made my stomach turn in a way none of the previous discoveries had. At the bottom of the last page, beneath the space for my signature, there was a second line, a witness signature line. It was already filled in. Loretta Pike. Loretta Pike had already signed as a witness to a document that I had not yet signed myself. I sat with that document in my lap for a long time that night, in the same chair where I used to help Ethan with his homework, and I understood something with total clarity. This wasn't a family being cautious. This wasn't peace of mind. Someone had already decided this document was going to be signed. They just hadn't gotten to the part where they needed my signature yet. I thought about calling Ethan right then and demanding an explanation. I thought about driving to his house and putting the document on his kitchen table and asking him, man to man, father to son, what exactly he thought he was doing. But I thought of something else instead. Something Claire used to say to me on the nights I came home furious about a fraud case at work, wanting to march into some stranger's office and shout the truth in their face. Anger tells them you know, Walter. Silence lets you find out how much they know. I put the document in a drawer and signed. I did not call Ethan. I did not text Vanessa. I let 3 days pass in complete, deliberate silence, giving no sign that anything was wrong. And in those 3 days, I started digging in earnest. Property records, the county recorder's office, anything public I could access. What I found on the 4th day stopped me cold, sitting alone at my kitchen table at 11 at night, staring at a document that had absolutely no business existing. A preliminary loan application, filed with a private lender 2 weeks earlier. Using my home, the home Claire and I paid off 19 years ago, free and clear, the home where we raised Ethan, the home where she took her last breaths, as collateral. The application listed me as the borrower. I had never applied for any loan. And at the bottom of that application, in a signature line I recognized instantly because I had spent 30 years learning to spot the difference between a real signature and a copied one, was my name, written in a hand that was almost mine. Almost, but not quite. I stared at that signature for what felt like an hour. I know my own handwriting. I have signed my name tens of thousands of times across 48 years of banking work, mortgage papers, birthday cards, Claire's hospital consent forms. I know exactly how my W leans, how my H closes at the top, the small hook at the end of Hayes, that I've never once been able to write the same way twice, which is precisely why it's so hard to fake convincingly. Whoever forged this signature had studied my handwriting carefully. They had gotten close. Close enough to fool a stranger. Close enough, maybe, to fool a loan processor moving quickly through a stack of applications. But not close enough to fool me. I printed the loan application, printed the unsigned power of attorney, and printed the law firm letter, and I laid all 3 side by side on my kitchen table, like case files, the way I used to lay out evidence for the compliance board. And for the first time since Claire's diagnosis 18 months earlier, I felt something other than grief sitting in my chest. I felt clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not an overprotective daughter-in-law getting ahead of herself. This was a coordinated plan, moving in stages, each stage designed to look reasonable on its own and devastating only when you saw them together. I needed to understand how deep it went. So the next morning, I called my sister-in-law, Rachel, Claire's younger sister, the one Lily had mentioned on the phone. Rachel and I had never been especially close, but she had always been honest with me, sometimes uncomfortably so. Walter, she sounded surprised to hear from me. Everything okay? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me, Rachel. What has Vanessa been saying about me? There was a long pause. Long enough that I knew the answer was going to be worse than I expected. Walter, I didn't want to get in the middle of it, Rachel said slowly. But she's told a few people you've been having trouble. Forgetting things. Getting confused about money, about dates. She said it started after Claire passed, that it's probably grief, but that it's been getting worse. My hands went cold around the phone. She told Loretta you left the stove on twice last month. She told my cousin you got lost driving to the pharmacy you've gone to for 15 years. She's been telling people, gently, kindly, like she's worried about you, But she's been telling people, Walter. None of it was true. I had not left the stove on. I had not gotten lost driving anywhere. I drive to that pharmacy every single week and could find it blindfolded. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked, and I heard my own voice crack slightly, the first time it had in this entire ordeal. Because I thought maybe it was true, Rachel said quietly. I'm sorry, Walter. Grief does strange things to people. I didn't want to believe you were declining, but I didn't want to believe it wasn't true either. I didn't know. That was the moment I understood the full shape of what Vanessa had built. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a narrative, planted carefully among people who loved me, told softly enough that nobody wanted to question it, because questioning it meant either accusing Vanessa of lying or accepting that I was declining. Either possibility was uncomfortable, so most people simply nodded along and said nothing. She had turned my own family's love for me into the very thing that would keep them silent while she worked. I hung up with Rachel and sat very still in my kitchen. And then, because I needed to know exactly how far this went, I did something I am not proud of, but which I do not regret. I drove to Ethan's house that evening, unannounced, at a time I knew Vanessa taught her Tuesday evening yoga class and would not be home. Ethan answered the door looking tired, the kids' cartoons playing somewhere behind him. Dad. Hey, is everything okay? I need to talk to you. Alone. He let me in, glancing nervously toward the hallway, as if Vanessa might materialize from thin air. We sat at his kitchen table, the same kind of table I once taught him fractions on, and I placed the loan application in front of him. He went pale reading it. Genuinely pale, not performed. I've spent 30 years learning to tell the difference between a man who's caught and a man who's surprised, and Ethan was surprised. Dad, I didn't know about this. I swear to you, I didn't know about this. Did you know about the power of attorney? The one that arrived with your handwriting on the note. His jaw tightened. That one, yeah? Vanessa said it was just precautionary. Standard stuff people our age do for their parents. Ethan, did you know Vanessa's been telling people I'm losing my memory? That I left the stove on? That I got lost driving to the pharmacy? He didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything. She said you seemed different since Mom died. He finally said, very quietly, not meeting my eyes. She said we needed to think ahead. Protect you. Protect the house. I didn't think it was like this. Ethan. I waited until he looked at me. Someone forged my signature on a loan application using our family home as collateral. That is not protecting me. That is a crime. He put his head in his hands, and for a moment, I saw the boy I raised, overwhelmed, cornered, wanting more than anything for the conflict to simply disappear so he wouldn't have to choose a side. What do I do, Dad? You tell me the truth. All of it. Right now, before she gets home. What he told me, over the next 20 minutes, in a rushed and guilty whisper, confirmed everything I had already assembled and added pieces I hadn't yet found. Vanessa's mother Loretta and stepfather Ray had been pushing the plan from the start, framing it to Ethan as him finally becoming the man of the family, taking control of assets they felt should have been managed more aggressively for years. Vanessa's younger brother Trent had been the one to recommend Whitfield and Cross, a firm apparently known in certain circles for moving quickly and asking few questions. The crew's exclusion hadn't been about family time at all. It had been timed deliberately, so that while I was distracted and hurt over being left behind, the power of attorney could be signed, quietly, without me paying close attention to what else was moving in the background. And the loan, the one with my forged signature, was intended to close within the month, using funds that, according to what Ethan had overheard Loretta discussing, were meant to be split 3 ways: renovations to Vanessa's parents' house, an investment Ray wanted to make, and a cushion for Ethan and Vanessa's own family. They were going to take out a loan against my paid-off home, using a forged signature, and spend the money before I ever found out what had happened. Why didn't you stop this, Ethan? I asked him, and I heard in my own voice not anger, but something closer to heartbreak. You're my son. Because every time I tried to push back, Vanessa cried, or Loretta made me feel like I was choosing you over my own marriage. And it was just easier to go along. Easier. That word again. I looked at my son, this grown man sitting broken at his own kitchen table, and I understood something I had suspected but not fully accepted until that moment. Ethan was not my enemy. He was weak, and he had made terrible choices, and his silence had allowed real harm to nearly happen to me. But he was not the architect of this. He was the tool someone else had used. The architect was still out there, teaching a yoga class, believing that within a few weeks, she would have quiet, legal control over everything Claire and I had spent a lifetime building, and that I would be too grief-stricken, too old, too distracted to ever notice. I need you to do exactly what I say, and I need you to not tell Vanessa I was here, I said. Can you do that? Ethan nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand like a boy, not a man of 38. I drove home that night with the loan application on the passenger seat beside me, and I did not go to sleep. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 3 in the morning, and I made a phone call I should have made 2 weeks earlier, the moment that first login alert appeared on my banking app. I called Robert Klein. Bob and I had known each other for over 20 years. He'd handled Claire's and my estate planning back when Ethan was still in high school, before he built his own practice specializing in exactly the kind of situation I now found myself living inside. Elder financial abuse, fraud, guardianship disputes. It was almost 2 in the morning, but I left him a message anyway, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. Bob, it's Walter Hayes. I need to see you as soon as possible. Someone in my family is trying to take control of my assets, and I have proof. I hung up the phone, looked at the 3 documents spread across my kitchen table one more time, and, for the first time in 18 months, I felt Claire's presence in that quiet house not as an absence, but as something closer to a promise being kept. Don't let Ethan drift away from you. I hadn't let him drift away, but I understood now, staring at that forged signature in the lamplight, that saving my relationship with my son and stopping the people using him were not the same fight. I intended to win both. But first, I needed Bob Klein. And I needed him to move fast, because somewhere in a house across town, a loan was scheduled to close in less than 4 weeks. And the people behind it had no idea that the man they thought was fading away had already built a case file thick enough to end them. Bob called me back at 7 the next morning, and by 9, I was sitting across from him in his office, the same office where he'd once helped Claire and me write our first will. He read through everything without speaking, the text messages, the law firm letter, the power of attorney, the loan application with its forged signature. When he finished, he took off his glasses and looked at me the way he used to look at a case he knew he could win. Walter, I want you to understand something clearly. This isn't a family disagreement anymore. What you've described, forging a signature on a loan document, secretly building a narrative about your competency, attempting to establish financial control without your consent. This is elder financial abuse, and depending on how the loan application was submitted, likely wire fraud and forgery as well. We are not going to handle this quietly with a stern family conversation. We're going to handle it properly. I felt something in my shoulders release that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 2 weeks straight. Tell me what to do. Bob moved fast, and he moved smart. Within 48 hours, we had accomplished 4 things. First, he drafted a formal revocation of any power of attorney. Even though I had never signed the one they'd sent, he wanted a paper trail making unmistakably clear that I had never granted anyone authority over my affairs and never would under these circumstances. It was filed with the county recorder, creating a public record. Second, he contacted the private lender directly, along with Mara Jennings at Meridian Trust, providing documentation of the forged signature and formally disputing the loan application. The lender's fraud department, once shown the discrepancy Bob and Mara both flagged independently, froze the application within a day. It never came close to closing. Third, Bob had me undergo a full cognitive evaluation with an independent physician, not because I doubted myself for 1 second, but because he wanted objective, dated, professional documentation directly contradicting any future claim that I was declining. The results were exactly what I expected. Sharp, fully oriented, no impairment of any kind. That report went into the file too. Fourth, and this was the part that mattered most to me personally, Bob drafted a formal letter. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Just a clear, documented warning, addressed to Vanessa, Loretta, and Ray, stating plainly that their attempts to forge legal documents and misrepresent my mental competency had been identified, documented, and reported to the appropriate authorities, and that any further action would result in criminal referral and civil suit. Do you want to send this quietly? Bob asked me. Or do you want them to know exactly how much you know, all at once? I thought about that question for a long time. 2 weeks earlier, I would have wanted to shout the truth from the driveway. But I had learned something from watching Vanessa work. The same lesson I'd spent 30 years teaching junior compliance officers. Power isn't loud. Power is knowing exactly what you have and choosing exactly when to use it. All at once, I said. I want them to understand there was never a moment I didn't see it coming. We arranged a meeting. Not a confrontation in a kitchen, not a shouting match. A formal sit-down at Bob's office, with Bob present, which I insisted on specifically because I wanted every word documented and I wanted Vanessa to understand, immediately, that this was no longer a conversation she could quietly steer. Vanessa arrived looking composed, dressed carefully, the same warm smile she'd worn at every holiday dinner for 6 years. Loretta came with her. Ethan came too, sitting slightly apart from his wife for the first time I could remember in years. Bob laid the documents on the table, one by one, exactly the way we'd planned. The forged signature, magnified, next to 3 verified samples of my actual handwriting. The bank record of the mortgage inquiry call. The cognitive evaluation report, dated and signed by an independent physician. The recorded revocation of any power of attorney already filed with the county. I watched Vanessa's face as each document landed on the table. The composure held for the first 2. By the 3rd, her jaw had tightened. By the 4th, the smile was gone entirely. "Walter," she started, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Vanessa." My voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than I'd felt in weeks. I spent 30 years reviewing files exactly like this one. I know what isolation looks like. I know what a manufactured competency narrative looks like. And I know what a forged signature looks like, because I have caught dozens of them in my career, and yours is not the best I've ever seen. Loretta opened her mouth to speak, and Bob cut in smoothly, professionally. "Mrs. Pike, I'd advise you to consider carefully what you say in this room. Everything here is being documented, and my client has chosen, so far, not to pursue criminal referral. That choice can change." The room went very quiet. "I want to be clear about something," I said, looking directly at Vanessa now. "This was never about money to me. I would have given you and Ethan anything you asked for honestly. All you had to do was ask. Instead, you decided I was already gone. You decided my life, my judgment, my home, everything Claire and I built together for 46 years, was simply available for the taking, the moment I looked old and grieving enough for people to believe it." Vanessa's composure finally cracked, not into an apology, but into something closer to indignation. "We were trying to plan ahead, Walter. Things happen to people your age. We were being responsible." "You were being responsible," I repeated slowly, "by forging my signature on a loan against my home. By telling my family I was losing my memory when I was not. By excluding me from a trip I paid for, specifically so I wouldn't notice what was happening behind me. That is not responsible, Vanessa. That is a plan, and it very nearly worked." Nobody spoke for a long moment. "What happens now?" Ethan finally asked, quietly, looking not at Vanessa but at me. "Now," Bob answered for me, "Mr. Hayes has formally revoked any claim to power of attorney, on record. The fraudulent loan application has been frozen and reported. Mr. Hayes is choosing, for now, not to pursue criminal charges against anyone in this room. A choice I want documented as entirely his, and entirely generous, given what was attempted here. But if any further attempt is made to access his accounts, forge his signature, or misrepresent his competency to any institution or family member, that choice will be reversed immediately, and the criminal referral will proceed." I watched something shift in Vanessa's expression, not remorse, not exactly, but recognition. Recognition that the story she had spent months carefully writing had just been taken out of her hands entirely, by the one person she had assumed would never notice the pages turning. "I think," I said, standing up, gathering the documents Bob handed back to me, "that we're finished here." I walked out of that office into the afternoon sun, and for the first time since I'd read Vanessa's text message 6 weeks earlier, just our little family this time, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel at all. Not triumph, exactly. Something quieter than that. I felt like myself again. 3 months have passed since that afternoon in Bob's office. I want to tell you the ending is simple, that Vanessa apologized, and everything healed like a wound closing clean. Real life doesn't work that way, and I promised myself, starting this story, that I would tell it exactly as it happened. Ethan and Vanessa are separated now. Not because I demanded it. I never once asked my son to leave his marriage. But because something breaks in a man when he watches his father laid bare on a table like evidence and realizes he stood by and let it happen for months out of nothing but a desire for peace. Ethan moved out in September. He's renting a small apartment 11 minutes from my house. He calls me every Sunday now, not twice a month, every single Sunday. And some weeks he brings Lily and Sam over for dinner, and I cook too much food out of old habit. And this time, I don't throw the extra away. I freeze it, because I know now they're coming back. Loretta and Ray, as far as I know, have not spoken to me since that meeting. I understand that. Some bridges, once you've seen what's underneath them, aren't meant to be walked back across. I never pursued criminal charges. Bob still asks me, every few months, if I've changed my mind, and every few months I tell him no. Not because I've forgiven what was attempted. I haven't, not fully, and I'm not sure I ever will. But because Lily and Sam still have a mother, and I decided a long time ago, back when Claire was dying, and made me promise not to let Ethan drift away, that I was not going to be the reason those two children lost anything more than they already had. That doesn't mean I was foolish about it. My accounts remain locked down tighter than a vault. My will has been rewritten with specific, ironclad protections that make anything like this nearly impossible to attempt again. Bob made sure of that. Mara Jennings still checks in on me personally every few months, which I suspect isn't standard practice for a bank security officer, but I've stopped questioning kindness when it shows up uninvited. I did take the cruise, eventually. Not that summer. The timing never worked out, between the lawyers and the paperwork and the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust with my son. But this past October, Ethan, Lily, Sam, and I flew to Seattle and boarded a ship bound for Alaska, for berths instead of 6, and somehow it felt like exactly the right number. I stood on the deck the first morning with Sam beside me, both of us bundled against the cold, waiting for the sun to clear the mountains. He was quiet for a long time, the way 10-year-olds sometimes surprise you by being quiet, and then he asked me something I wasn't prepared for. "Grandpa, were you scared? When you found out what they were trying to do?" I thought about how to answer him honestly, without frightening him, without making the world seem crueler than a 10-year-old needs it to seem. I was scared, I told him, but I was more determined than I was scared. "Your grandmother used to tell me that being scared and being strong aren't opposites, Sam. Sometimes they're the exact same feeling, wearing different clothes." He nodded like that made perfect sense to him, the way children do when they trust you completely, and went back to watching the water for whales. That night, alone in my cabin after the kids had gone to bed, I took out Claire's photo, the one I keep in my wallet, worn soft at the corners from being touched too many times, and I sat by the window, looking out at the dark water and the distant shapes of glaciers catching moonlight. "We made it," I told her. "Took the long way, but we made it." I think about the woman who spent months building a version of me that didn't exist, a forgetful old man, drifting toward irrelevance, an inconvenience to be managed rather than a father to be loved. I think about how close that version of me came to becoming real, not because I was actually declining, but because paperwork doesn't care about truth. It only cares about signatures. And for a while, someone was trying very hard to put mine where it didn't belong. But here is what I learned, and here is what I want you to carry with you if you've stayed with me this far. Being older does not mean being powerless. Being grieving does not mean being blind. And being underestimated, it turns out, might be the single greatest advantage a person can have, because nobody watches closely for the fight coming from the person they've already decided has stopped fighting. Claire used to say that love and vigilance aren't opposites either. You can love your family with your whole heart and still keep your eyes open. I believed her about a lot of things over 46 years of marriage. I believe her about that one more than almost anything else. I am 71 years old. I buried my wife 18 months ago. My family tried, quietly and politely, to take everything she and I spent our lives building. And I am still here, still standing in my own house, still holding the pen. They just don't get to decide anymore what I sign it to.